Hey, so again, welcome to the Article of the Week webinar. As you can see on this slide, there's a short URL to this presentation, which you are welcome to follow along with if you would like, or just look at what I'm doing and then go back to it later for reference. So we're going to talk about what an Article of the Week is, why it's worth doing, some topics. I'll talk you through my process of making an Article of the Week, how I would evaluate it, how I would grade students' writing, some mini lessons that are good ideas for students and how to sort of implement that. We'll have time for some discussion and Q&A after that as well. So I am so fortunate to be able to work at NASA's Educational Resource Center in Fairmont, West Virginia. We're part of the Katherine Johnson IV&V facility, and we're a partnership between NASA and Fairmont State University, which allows us to do some really cool things. It gives us some more flexibility and allows us to have just a huge impact. Normally, we're out doing in-person trainings on our equipment loan program that allows educators to borrow equipment that maybe they wouldn't be able to afford or store on their own, like robotics kits, portable planetarium, and a variety of other things on different topics. But now we're doing webinars and getting some cool information out there, sometimes about space, or like this one, sometimes about other topics that teachers have identified as something that would be useful for them. So here's our team. We are just such a great group, and I'm so excited to work with all of these people. We couldn't do what we do without our AmeriCorps volunteers, who are also doing webinars now as well, mostly focused on robotics. Ryan's our robotics lead. We're involved in all of the competitive robotics programs in the state of West Virginia, and it's a really cool thing to see. If you haven't been to one of those tournaments, I highly recommend stopping in or volunteering. It's a pretty great experience. But we're all working from home, working remotely now, and still trying to advance science in the students of West Virginia's lives. Okay, so now overview of Article of the Week. This idea came out of Kelly Gallagher's book, Read-A-Side. He tells the story in the book about why he got started on this, and he's not a science educator, he was a social studies and English teacher. And he found it just shocking, the lack of background knowledge his high school students had. He tells this story where he had given all the students an article about a recent news event. And this book was written about 10 years ago. And one of the girls in his class was reading it, and she raised her hand, and he goes over and he says, "What's the problem?" He's like, she said, I think I know what's going on here, but I just don't understand who this Al guy is. They keep talking about this Al guy like he's really important, but I've never heard of him. Is he, what kind of a job does he have? Who is he? And he's thinking, he's like, there's no Al in the article. What is she talking about? And he looks at it, and it's Al-Qaeda. She didn't have the background knowledge to have known what Al-Qaeda was, so the article wasn't making any sense to her. So he came up with this Article of the Week idea as a way to broaden students' knowledge of the world around them. Each week, he would assign a article from a newspaper or a magazine, some current event related thing, and expect his students to read and write a response to it. And his response length is about 1 page, is his goal for his students. And the idea is that by reading more widely than just things that are in textbooks or what they're coming across in an educational setting, students are getting a better understanding of the world around them and becoming more informed citizens. Okay, another person who's really done a lot of work with AOWs is Dave Stewart Jr. He has a great blog where he talks in a really informal way, I guess not informal, but accessible way, about how he's developed Articles of the Week to fit his approach. So that's a really good resource if it's something you're interested in doing a little bit more research on. If you would like to head over there for that resource. And again, he doesn't teach science, he teaches social studies at the high school level, but the basic principles are pretty transferable and applicable to science. So when I started doing this, and I mostly did this at the middle school level. For 1 year, I was teaching middle school and high school science classes. And so this was similar in my approach, but my goal for my students was for them to build their science background knowledge, to practice reading, writing, and begin opinion writing, especially at the middle school level. I find that my middle school students were so comfortable writing summaries but not very comfortable in sharing their input. And as we're transitioning from middle school to high school with the end goal of them being able to enter a career or attend college, they need to be able to express their opinions in writing. And so a lot of my work with my middle schoolers was centered around, no, you don't need to just do a summary of this. You need to tell me what you think about it. You need to tell me if this person convinced you of this. You need to tell me if this fits with your other background knowledge about this. This needs to be something personal, something that only you could have written. And probably the biggest thing is just recognizing that science is an ongoing process. We are so focused as teachers at getting them to understand science concepts, most of which have been decided for 100 years or more, that we don't always give them the flavor of new discoveries that are happening. The idea that science isn't some settled thing that you can just read about in a book. It's a process. It's things that people do. It's discoveries that are made on an everyday basis. And sometimes those discoveries are big enough, they make mainstream news and our students might hear about them. But I kind of viewed it as my obligation as a science teacher to give my students a really rich understanding of the idea that we haven't figured everything out. We don't know everything. Scientists are still discovering new things, even about the most mundane things that we take for granted. So the nature of science was a really big push, as well as background knowledge. I felt like these were a great supplement to what we were learning in class, that could maybe connect to something that students learned about years ago and give them a deeper understanding now that they're in an older, they're at an older age, I guess, and give them some more depth of knowledge about the world around them beyond just the subjects that I was necessarily responsible for teaching them that year. Okay, another really great bonus about Articles of the Week is we have these literacy science standards in West Virginia that kind of get short shrift. A lot of the times what we do in class just normally day to day does cover these, but just by doing the Article of the Week, you're hitting about half of the science literacy standards. So it's a way to make sure that you are covering that English language arts application within a science context, because science writing does differ, a lot from the writing that's going on in an English classroom or in a social studies classroom. Okay, so this information is from Common Sense Media, and they do a survey every year of tweens and teens and their reading habits. And so with the pie charts over here, this is how many students read for pleasure. And among tweens, about a third of them read at least every day. And about 2/3, if you're including that, read at least once a week, okay? As they move into teens, that drops to about a fifth of them are reading every day, and half of them are reading at least once a week. I find it just horrifying that there are students out there who are reading for pleasure less frequently than once a week, and maybe that's because I'm an avid reader and I really get a lot of enjoyment out of stories and learning new things. But the idea that we've got half of our teenagers, half of our high school population that's not picking up a book more frequently than once a month is just really upsetting. And part of the reason for that is when you look at these times over here, the kids who read daily, their average amount of time they spend reading is an hour or more. And that's pretty stable between tweens and teenagers. So what that means is they're getting an hour worth of words that their peers are not. We need to have kids reading outside of school hours. Otherwise, their achievement relative to their peers is going to be so much less. They're exposed to fewer sentence structures. They're exposed to less vocabulary. And that achievement gap that we know about is just widening because they're choosing not to spend some of their free time reading. Now, I'm not saying Articles of the Week are the magic bullet that are going to switch all of these kids who hardly ever read into daily readers. But if they're in the habit of reading something, it's something that's going to come more naturally to them. If all of their teachers are on the same page saying, hey, reading is important and I want you to do this, it's going to sink in a little bit more than if it's just like, oh, this one English teacher who I don't even really like that much is telling me to read a lot. If we have this united front that literacy is something important and valuable that we can be modeling for our students, it's going to make it less easy to ignore one or two teachers who are telling them to read. So that's my pitch. That's why I think articles of the week are important. That's kind of what they are. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the process I would go through for making them. I'll pause for a second though. Like, does anyone have any questions? I know I've been going really fast. Please do not hesitate to pop something into chat or to unmute yourself if you would like to. Okay, so an article of the week is just something that can be from a news website or a magazine or even those weekly readers that some of us have access to, where you give the student an article to read. They usually get it on Monday. I would usually do a little overview of it and what it is about, a little introduction on Monday. They have the week to read it and write a response to it, and then on Friday we would have a discussion about it and their writing would be due. So that was the basic framework for every week of the year. I would always start with a news article that I at least found was interesting. What I find is interesting is usually not a great match for my students. Sometimes it is, but sometimes not. So I tried to find things that they would be interested in. Newsella is an excellent website for that. If you haven't been to Newsella, it's a free site. There are some things that are behind a paywall, but the bulk of their site is news articles, and they can't put those behind a paywall because they're collaborations with like the Washington Post, or there's a couple French newspapers that they use or things like that. So there's always going to be a free component to it, and the news articles are the good stuff. Right here, I'm just going to go to the main site and show this to you. So they have articles that are current events that are borrowed from various newspapers and reporting agencies. And then they do this cool thing where they create multiple Lexile levels of it. So you can choose a level that's appropriate for your students. You can filter by science only. This first article happens to be a science article, so we'll just look at that. If you do the pay version, you can do some cool learning management system stuff with it where you have students in there and it's all digital. I never have paid for it, so I don't know how useful that is. I've just always kind of looked at their free articles and used those. So you'll notice over here, this button up here has the 100 or 1120 Lexile level. You can adjust this up or down depending on your students. And down here, it's telling you that this is recommended for middle school and high school students. And so if you look at this first little bit here, it's a pretty readable amount. If you drop it down to the lowest level, it makes the sentences simpler. It makes the words that they use more restricted. So it's a way that you could use to modify for students who are not at the same reading level, or you could just choose the level that's most appropriate for the bulk of your students. So you have a couple of options there, and that's one of the reasons why I like Newsella a lot. Google Alert, you can have Google email you every day articles about a particular topic. Science would be a good one to have for that. And then there's a lot of online magazine kind of subscriptions out there. I have a New Scientist subscription, so that's one that I pull a lot of my articles of the week from when I was in the classroom. Listen to what your students want to read about. My students never really enjoyed this assignment. I mean, they don't enjoy doing math problems or having to turn in a lab report either, so I didn't really care that they didn't enjoy this, but that did make them want to improve the assignment because they knew they were going to have to do it every week. And so I listened to suggestions that they had for particular topics that they wanted to, and I would try to find articles that met their interests. Some evergreen topics, some things that kids are always going to be interested in are concussions. So many of our students are student athletes and are really invested in whether or not they're going to be able to play sports and what restrictions are going to be in place regarding head injuries. Anxiety is another one, and anything food related. I mean, my middle school students are like constantly hungry. So if there's anything related to food, that was usually a great topic. Sometimes I would tie it into my current unit. I usually wouldn't. It would usually just be some news story. It's kind of nice to take a break from whatever content you're deep diving into and have another perspective or just a break from that, to remind you all that there's other stuff going on out there than whatever particular body system you're working on that particular week. Um, but it's entirely up to you. Sometimes if it's an article that's really good and ties into our content, I'll absolutely include that. I try to always make there be 2 articles. So if I'm giving them one sheet of paper, the front side would have one article and the back would have another. Just that simple ability to choose between one article and the other increases student engagement and their willingness to participate in and complete this assignment. So I really recommend having a couple options available for students, even if it does make the articles you are encouraging them to read shorter, right? Because if you only have 1 page versus 2, I'd rather have them invested in and enjoying one shorter article than slogging away through a longer article that they don't care about and aren't interested in and aren't invested in. My last tip is to make it a little controversial. Should be something that your students can have opinions on, that are strong opinions and can differ from one another. Having these conversations during the discussion part is only engaging if there's some discourse, if there's some back and forth between students. So this should be something that maybe challenges their preconceived notions. Those are always really good articles. It could be something where it's a very undecided topic. It could be something a little bit controversial. I'm not saying to get yourself in trouble with your administrators or your parents, but make it something that your students can disagree about, and that is going to make it a more engaging experience. So what I would do is I would find some article that I liked. So this was a space.com article. And I would just put it into a Word document that had really tiny margins and 2 columns. And so this is kind of mimicking that newspaper magazine style, and getting kids a little bit more familiar with it. It takes a few minutes usually to format it so it looks all right. And then that's what I would just print out and hand out to my students on Mondays. I would also make a digital version available. So on our class website, it would be a PDF that you could download so that if a student forgot an article at home, they could access it remotely. And right now we definitely want to be able to access things remotely. So a big question that I think science teachers have is, how are we supposed to grade writing? It is not my forte. It is not something I particularly enjoy. So I made it as simple for myself as possible. When I looked over my IEPs at the start of the year, when I came to East Fairmont Middle School in West Virginia, I saw that there were a lot of accommodations for having a graphic organizer for writing. And so instead of making this something that was just available for my students with IEPs, I made it something that was a part of our whole class. So I came up with a graphic organizer that had the 4 basic elements I was looking for in everyone's writing responses, and then they could choose to use this or not, whether or not they had accommodations. Graphic organizers are fantastic for writing, particularly when we're scaffolding young writers and trying to push them a little bit farther beyond what they're able to do right now. And so these are the 4 things that I wanted from them. The summary box is the smallest. I really only wanted a sentence or 2 of summary to let me know where they were starting at. And then I wanted to see their questions. The idea is that they're getting an article of the week should be new. They should be a little bit confusing for some of them. We're building their background knowledge, right? So if they're not asking themselves questions, if there's nothing that they're puzzled by, then it's probably not achieving its goal. So I would tell my students to aim for at least a couple questions every week about the article of the week. Connections to background knowledge is another important thing that research has shown helps solidify new information. So getting them thinking about how what they're reading now relates to what they already know is a really powerful way to get them to broaden their background knowledge. And then the last one is my thinking changed. Right? As we are reading new information and taking things in, it should change us. It should change our mind about something. When we learn something new, it could be profound, but it could just be a simple something. But our thinking should change in some way. We should be able to say, okay, am thinking about this topic differently because I know more information about. Whoa, I'm talking too fast. All right. So this is also how I would evaluate their writing. If they had most of these elements, they would get full credit. If not, they would get partial credit, which was just the lowest passing grade. So I had just an A or D system with this. It did not take me very long to read through their writing. I wasn't critiquing it for grammar. I wasn't looking for anything like beyond these 4 elements. So I could just give their papers a skim, put an A or a D on top, and send it off back home to them. It really helps with time management if you're not grading with the mindset of an English teacher where everything needs to get corrected. This was just, are you communicating these ideas to me? And that's what writing is, it's communicating ideas. I'll let the English teachers worry about those things that are more about structure and form. I'm just looking for these 4 basic components in their writing. Okay, that said, I do feel ants crawling on my skin with certain things about writing. If I'm seeing them again and again, particularly when you're grading 100 some of these. This is a Dave Stewart Jr. idea, and it is the skull and crossbones list. And these are things that are absolutely not tolerated in any writing whatsoever. So if you are reading a piece of student work and they're a middle school or a high school student and they're not punctuating, that's not okay. Like, they should have learned this a long time ago. It is a standard convention that they are expected to adhere to look like a well-read human being. And so the skull and crossbones list is the idea that these are the basic things in your writing that if they're not there or if they're wrong, you redo your writing until they are correct. So my list was start sentences with a capital letter, end sentences with punctuation, capitalize the word I. Topic sentences have nouns, not pronouns. I got tired of reading articles of the week that started out, they said this, but I don't really know about that, or something like that. You need to give me enough information in your topic sentence that I know what you're talking about, what they is, what it is. Give me some actual nouns that will let me understand what you are trying to tell me. If you change topics, start a new paragraph. My students had definitely been drilled on that. 5 sentences is a paragraph, and that's not what a paragraph is. Absolutely not. I understand why teachers insist on a certain number of sentences in a paragraph because they're wanting to challenge their writing and bring it to a more advanced level. But if you change topics, that's the end of your paragraph and you start a new one. And then they use there appropriately is just my personal pet peeve in writing. Like, I hate seeing it. And so that was it. So if I had a student who turned in a paper that had 1 or more of these, as soon as I saw it, I would just draw a little skull on top of it. I wouldn't do the crossbones because that takes too much work, but I'd draw a little skull on top and I'd tape it up on the wall so they could see it. They'd grab their paper, fix whatever it is, turn it back in. I didn't take any points off for that. It did make a little bit more work because I was having to not just grade everything all at once. I would have to go back and get those skull and crossbones papers in there. But I think it's really valuable to insist on some standards in writing at the middle school and high school level. Capitalizing and using punctuation is non-negotiable in a lot of job and certainly in college settings. And so holding students to that standard, I think, is something that's worthwhile. Okay, so I would also do some mini lessons based on what I could see students need in their writing, like making an engaging topic sentence. Using quotations effectively is another one. And I would use structures from this book, They Say, I Say, which basically has a bunch of sentence stems. It's a book that was written for college students who need to make their writing more complex and engaging. But it has basic structures for how you incorporate a quote and frame it and integrate it into your own writing in a better way. So we would work on a sentence stem or 2 in that particular week. These mini lessons I would do on Monday, and I would really base them on what I had seen grading that weekend in the papers in the classrooms. Also, this would be a time where I could talk about the characteristics of science writing. every one of our science articles has about a third, well, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through, some scientist who was not involved in the study and what their opinion was. That's a really important convention in science writing. And I don't mean like academic journal writing. I mean basic like science reporting, things you would see in a magazine or a newspaper. That you get other scientists who aren't involved in this study to talk about what they think about it. Relying on experts to sort of ground new information is really important. And having someone who's a disinterested third party give their opinion on it is something I wanted my students paying attention to when they were looking and writing. Because something might sound really cool and have a great clickbaity headline, and then you're reading about it and the expert scientist says, there's no way that this could work, and this is and this are wrong, and I still have questions about this. And it throws the whole study into making it a little less reliable and maybe not somewhere that you want to have your information from. So teaching my students to look out for those expert opinions in science writing is something that's really valuable for them as a life skill, and becoming an adult who is science literate enough to understand and read through new information. So I'd usually pull up a slideshow with just some examples, and I've linked it here, and I think I'm going to show it to you really fast. I'd show some example article of the week responses, ones that were great and ones that weren't so great, and I would also share some of my own writing. Even if we don't think of ourselves as writers, as science teachers, we're still the best writer in our classrooms, with very few exceptions to that. So showing students our writing and how we would respond to this article is something that can be really valuable because it's modeling that idea of what we want from them. Okay, so here's my thing. I pull out some great things that I really appreciated them doing. I would give them a tip going forward in the next week to maybe help them and some things to work on. These are examples of student writing. This was towards the beginning of the year, and we were talking about how, yes, putting things in quotes is better than plagiarizing, but no, your whole response shouldn't just be a quote from the article. Okay, so this person took up like probably a third of their paragraph, or no, probably what is that, like 7/8 of their paragraph, just copying out a quotation from the text and then said it was interesting. That's not a good response, okay? A better thing to do is to have a little quote, talk about what you wondered about it, right? And kind of get into what that idea is. So talking to students about the difference between using a quotation to fill space and using a quotation as a jumping off point to share your ideas is something that's definitely my middle schoolers needed, okay? So I would do those little mini lessons when I introduce the article of the week on Monday to sort of boost their writing and to let them know what I was looking for and encourage them in their work. And I have to say, I think my students who were up there as negative examples, and I never put their names on there, but they would almost always volunteer like, oh, that one's mine, that one's mine. The ones who were in there as negative examples were almost more excited than the ones who were in there as positive examples, right? Like they really liked that they got to see their work up on the screen and that they knew I was talking about it in all of my classes, whether it was a good or a bad thing. I wouldn't do mini lessons every week because they do take more time. But, you know, at least once a month, I would try to put in something there to say, hey, yeah, I am reading your responses. I'm looking for these things. You're doing a great job about this. Let's try this next week. Okay, the discussion is like my favorite part because kids can get really into it depending on your group. This would be every Friday. It could take different formats. So some weeks I would expect everyone to say something and I would keep track of to make sure that everyone participated in the debate. Sometimes I would just have them turn and talk at their tables and have smaller group conversations about them. So it's a good way to play around with different formats of discussion. So popcorn, Socratic, debate. You could have a fishbowl as well, where you have a few students talking in the middle and then everyone else is listening around the side, and then students will tap in and out of these conversations. So it's a way that you can boost engagement and excitement, because kids like talking about things and they like having conversations with their peers, most of them. And so it's a way to make it a more enjoyable experience. It's also an accommodation. My students who I knew had a lot of difficulty reading print. I would allow them to be writing their article responses during our class discussion. So it was a way to bypass the reading part of it, but still engage with the ideas and still be held responsible for writing their own response. So they were still practicing their writing skills and their thinking skills, which to me are more important than their reading skills, if that was something that was particularly difficult for them. I think sometimes our students who have specific learning disabilities in reading get left behind because we're so focused on making sure that they can read at their peers level that we're not giving them enough work to engage their brains at their peers level. It's really difficult to find lower reading level material that's appropriate for middle school and high school students. And so sometimes not forcing the issue on making sure they read it themselves is like not doing that allows you to have them focus on more critical thinking and improving their background knowledge kind of skills. And it's fun. Okay, so articles of the week build background knowledge. They allow us to expand what students are learning beyond our particular unit or our standards that we're covering. They allow for practice reading, writing, and discussing. And they let students know that the nature of science has changed. Science is not some static thing you can read in your science book. It is an ongoing field that has new advances, new theories, new ideas all the time that are being tested and that are we're revising our knowledge based on. So giving them that snapshot or that taste of what real science is a really powerful way for them to understand more what science is. Because some of our students who really enjoy science at the middle school and high school level are not necessarily going to make good scientists because they aren't asking questions and they aren't thinking critically and they're not breaking things. They're good at memorizing stuff and science is interesting, but that's not what the real work of science is. So that discrepancy between the way we teach science and what science really is, you can talk about that using the article of the week as your jumping off point. Okay, so I want you to think for a few minutes. What roadblocks do you have? Is this something you would try in your classroom? What questions or concerns do you have? Feel free to unmute yourself and share those. Feel free to post them in the chat. Feel free to just take a minute or two and jot some notes down to yourself about what you think.
Hey, Emily, this is Josh.
Hey,
I'd like
Josh.
to say something first.
Yeah, go for it.
I I would like to say that I had a teacher when I was in middle school that kind of operated on this process in our science class, and I really feel like it made the difference for me in my writing ability. Maybe because I was interested in science, but it helped me become a better writer. And I eventually went off to college and could write lab reports and these things that you thought maybe were a little difficult for your students. And I think that it put me in the framework to start writing scientifically later on in life. And so I really thank her for going through the effort to kind of make these literacy attempts. And so I want to encourage other teachers that are in that position to kind of implement something like this, to do it, because it did make a difference for me.
Absolutely. In science, we've got the best stuff. Like we have the most engaging, interesting content, in my opinion, definitely biased. And so getting kids to write about it is less of a hard sell than getting them to analyze some 19th century, book or article or play or something and write about that. We've got cool stuff happening. They could write about that. And so I think that science is an easier sell for students to get them engaged and get them excited about. I'm so glad to hear that you think this will work in the upper elementary levels. I definitely scaffold the amount of writing I expect from students. At the beginning of the year, I will say one paragraph, and this is teaching 7th and 8th grade. And then as the year goes on, I sort of work them up to turning in a full page. And that's just handwritten one side. I don't expect the same thing from all of my students. So if I know my student has difficulty with writing, I'm fine with it being less than that as long as they've got good ideas in it. But I want to push and encourage my students to expand on their abilities to write. Yeah. Oh, Jamie, it sounds like you already have a good framework for this with having an article you talk about on Mondays. Yes. Yes, helping students learn to think. And yeah, if you're already engaging with text, and you already have articles that you're using, like a weekly reader type thing, you can use that as your article and then just increase your expectation for writing and discussion. Good. Yeah, the Newsella is really helpful. Um, and you can definitely, if you have science teachers that you collaborate with, you can suggest Newsella articles to them and then be able to adjust it down for your students or up for theirs, depending on what kind of a co-teaching situation that you have. But yeah, Newsella is really fantastic for that. Yes. There's a lot of really cool annotation stuff you can do on the website as well, but that's like a whole other webinar. Okay, I'm not going to rush you. I'm going to take a couple more minutes before I go on. You're absolutely right that it is hard to get students writing their own ideas and opinions. We've spent so much time at the elementary level trying to get them to write things that aren't just their ideas, right? We start out in kindergarten telling them to write about the things that they like and their families and really focused on personal things because that's developmentally appropriate at their age. And then we get into those middle elementary years and we need them writing more objectively and we need to get them to summarize. That's a really important foundational stone in their writing. And then when they get to upper elementary and middle, we have to get them back into persuasive writing and opinion writing. And we've spent so long telling them, no, you don't put your opinions in the text. Yes, you just do a summary. You write about it. You be objective. That it's hard to convince them, especially because they're in that middle school, high school oppositional kind of framework where they're pushing back more against authority figures in their lives, as they should, as it is an appropriate developmental milestone for them. But this is an important way to kind of shift the focus of, yes, you are writing objectively, but you also need to incorporate your ideas and opinions and your voice into your text, into what you are writing. Good. I'm glad you think it would be a library appropriate thing. I'm on my soapbox for sure. Absolutely. All right, so we have about 20 minutes left scheduled. I'm gonna open it up to you guys. Do you wanna watch me throw together an article of the week and see my process? Is that something that would be helpful instead of having me just talk about it? If you really like that graphic organizer and wanted more information on how to make that, I use Canva. I could do a little tutorial on how to use Canva to create cool looking graphic organizers. It's super simple. I could talk more about they say, I say if you're interested in that sentence stem idea. This link is to a PDF that has a bunch of the sentence stems just pulled out. And then in the comments under here, there's a link to a full PDF copy of the book. So if you're super interested in it, you have resources. If you want to just get on with your day, absolutely do so. And I'm just gonna put in the chat window the link to our survey. I definitely want to respect your time. So if this is not something that you're interested in hanging around for the rest of, thank you for being with us, and I'll let you get on with your day. But if you could please fill out our survey. It's something that's really important to our grant reporting, and it will also automatically generate and email you a certificate that shows that you attended this. So if you want to get on with your day, absolutely. But I can talk about anything that you guys think of that you think would be valuable. I see someone's asking about the resource for the rubric. That is Canva. which is a really easy to use graphic design website that makes some pretty engaging, mostly designed to be color printed, but you can tweak it to make it be okay for black and white, which is, I know, most of our situations. So I could talk you through how to make a graphic organizer on there. Absolutely. Let's go to Canva. So this requires an account, but it is free. There are paid accounts that you can get with it, and some of the graphics in there you have to pay for if you want to use them. I've always gotten by using the free stuff, and that's where I've been at. So what Canva's genius is they have a series of templates that were made by actual graphic design people. So the fonts all look good together, the color schemes are great. You just pick them and you put your information in there. So let's look at those templates. And I think for that graphic organizer, I did like a small flyer. But you can see they're definitely designed for social media and online things as well. You may recognize some of this stuff as being a part of other websites, and it definitely has that like very new flavor that websites have on them. So these are like options you can choose from. Flyers, cards. I think I did it as a card, right? Because that would be something kind of small. Yeah. So let's go in there and we'll throw something together. You can start from scratch and create a blank one if you like, or you can go through here and see something that you think would be a good fit for you, right? And you don't worry about the content so much as you do the images on there, because you can adjust it to be anything you would like. If you have like a school mascot that you want to incorporate, you can usually find art for that. Something that's related to your content area, whatever. I tried to get things that look like they would be good if I printed them out in black and white, if I knew I was going to print them. If I thought it was going to be something I would just have as a visual online, I would definitely go a little more wild. So Canva is just, you are designing an image. So anything where you would incorporate or use an image is what you would use this for. And I'm actually going to pop over to my designs and show you some examples of things that I've done. Nope, didn't click on the right thing. So these are just some buttons that I mocked up for our newsletter. We were thinking about having some branding in there, and so that's what those were. I make them as little cheat sheets to myself. Like when I was doing, I was trying out Marzano lesson plans for a while, and so I did this as like an infographic to jog my memory about things. Oh, it's going to take a while to load. So these are his like tips for creating effective lesson plans, right? And so I would just include some kind of an image with it, and then a description. This would be something that would be catching my very attention deficit eye and make me focus on a little bit more. What else do we have in here? Day in the park, I did flyers for us that were, I think, just emailed. Where's my graphic organizer for this? It might be in a different account. One of the teachers at my school used the SWAG acronym with her students, starts with a capital, written neatly, a space between every word, given punctuation at the end. So that was something I made and had students print out and put in their interactive notebooks so they could refer to it. I guess, oh, here it is. So with the article of the week Go that I made, graphic organizer, it's a postcard format. So you can choose from a variety of layouts. The ones that say Pro are the ones that you would have to pay for. But if you're just looking for, like, let's look for some frames that we want to put in here. There's a bunch of them that are free. So if I wanted a bunch of lines, no, that's not what I want. Why would I want that? So anyway, you can go in here and you can build different things. So let's start a new one. That's about the same kind of thing. We're gonna make a copy in Canva 2.0. Okay. templates. So templates over here are where you kind of want to start. And I tried to pick some that were sort of visually sparse because I knew that I would be printing with them. Now let's do this one. Okay, I made a copy, so I'm good to replace. So I don't like that the background is black. So I can change that to white. Now I can't see my text, so I can change my text color. The photos that are included, this is a really cool feature. It'll pick out the sort of color palette from them. So if you want images that work well together, having some of these earth tones that you can see are similar in a couple of those images are really a good way to do that. It is a little bit tricky to get used to some things. If you haven't used a sort of higher end graphic editor before, you'll notice when I click on here, it selects these 3 images at the same time. And they're a group and you can ungroup them, but I'm not seeing where that button is. So if I wanted to move these images around like 1, 2, 3 as separate, I would have to ungroup them first. Link is not what I want. I don't want the lock. Huh. Okay, so as I'm in here, I'm realizing that what I've done, I probably did so easily because I have some experience with programs like Photoshops and things like this. I probably could develop a whole webinar on how to use Canva effectively in the classroom. But if I wanted to do something simple that was just like a welcome back to school or a, here's some of our classroom information, like little cards to hand out at parent teacher night or something like that, I could use one like this that already has kind of a school theme. I would put maybe, okay, so my text is too big. I can adjust my text size down. Okay, and then I would put our classroom website down here. Okay, so then that is a new page. Instead of having this postcard kind of format, I can just get rid of those lines, I'm pretty sure. Maybe I can't. Yeah, there we go. I might instead decide to insert a little text box. Okay, and so I would say materials students need every day. And then I would make my list. Okay, and this could just be something that I make as a little informational handout to give to anyone who attended my classroom on parent teacher night. There's a lot of cool opportunities with this where you can make something that looks really slick without a ton of effort if you just spend some time finding the right template. Okay, I feel like we've gone completely off the rails here. Has this part been helpful at all? Is there other stuff you would like to see? Yes, it is definitely lowering the bar if you're interested in making like graphic design kind of things. And they do have a ton of formats. If you're someone who does a lot of posting on the internet, whether you have a classroom blog or website, they can make some really nice graphics very, very simply and for free, which is pretty cool. But like I said, I would probably have to design a whole webinar about this to really show you the features effectively. But I really like them for graphic organizers. It was always a little tricky to get the colors right so it would print out and still look okay. Sometimes my imagination of what something's going to look like when it prints out in black and white is not what actually happens and makes it really hard to read. So it's definitely something you want to practice on if you're interested in that. But I would print out those little graphic organizers. I think I could fit 4 on a sheet of paper, and they would just be available in a stack underneath the where I had my articles of the week on one of those little wire organizers. So students who wanted to use them could pick them up. I think 1 week out of the year, I said you had to use them just to get students aware that they were there and make them try it so they could see whether it was something that was helpful or not. But after that, I would just allow them to use it if it was helpful and skip it if it was not something that they needed in their writing. What other questions do you have? How could I help in other ways? Are there any ideas, things that you're thinking through that you want some input on? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could make some really nicely laid out articles of the week in there. I was definitely of the fast and dirty school of this is something we're doing every week, so I'm going to be as efficient as possible with it and just slap it into the same Word document again and again and make a new saved file of it. But you can make it as exciting as you would like. Sure. Okay. So the hardest part is the part I've already done, which is finding a couple interesting articles. My brain is still so much in the pattern of looking for good ideas and good articles that I'll be reading something just for myself and be like, oh, that'd be a good article of the week. It's like, no, shut it down. You haven't taught in a year. Like you can let it go. You're not making articles of the week for anyone, but it helped for planning for this webinar. So I guess it's good that I still have that impulse there. So my thought process on this one, it's got a really catchy title, Scientists Obtain a Lucky Image of Jupiter. I can talk about how a headline can sort of give us a window into the article. For a while, headlines have sort of moved from being attention getting. Like if you look at old newspapers from back in the 30s or 40s or so, they were definitely attention getting headlines, and then you would have to read the article to find out what it was. They've sort of transitioned in probably the 90s and knots to being summaries of the article and just giving you the short version of what the article is going to tell you more about. And now we've got this idea of clickbait headlines where they're, again, just attention getting and you have to go into the article to see it. This is absolutely an example of an attention getting headline. When I read this, and I would talk aloud just like I'm talking to you, to my students about this, and like when I'm reading this, I think that, wow, maybe it was a really good night for observing and they took a really good picture, or something happened and they thought their camera wasn't working, but it ended up working better than they thought it was going to. Like something happened that was lucky, is where I'm going when I read this headline. And then when you get into the article, I was looking for glasses online. Okay, when you get into the article, this is a really cool image, and this is something that I would definitely show to them during the Monday introduction of the article, because it's not going to come through on paper. Um, when you read into the article, Lucky is an imaging technique that allows them to make a mosaic or a composite of many, many different images. So they're taking the good parts of a bunch of different pictures and making a composite. So it's completely different than what my understanding of the word lucky in this case meant at the beginning. And this would be something that kids would find interesting because they like it when they feel like they're being lied to and they find out about it. Like that's something that really gets their hair up, and they can write for a while about that. So I would maybe introduce how my thinking changed throughout the course of reading this article, that I didn't know about this imaging technique and now I do. And I've got another definition of the word lucky. Lucky imaging is using good parts of multiple pictures and making a composite image. And it talks about some really cool stuff about infrared imaging too. There's a lot of depth to that. And then the other one that I would, if I had this as my front page, I would want a different article on the back. And I try to keep it as different as possible. So this was really an astronomy, physical science kind of thing. The other article is about how we should all tear up our lawns and put in wildflowers instead. And so that's definitely something that a lot of students can relate to. Some of them have jobs mowing lawns, and so they might have a stake in that and want people to keep their lawns so they can keep their walking around money. Some of them might have to mow their lawn as a chore and not be able to, or not want to, and so maybe they love this idea. So this is something that definitely we could have a lively debate about in the classroom. And it talks about the benefits of replacing our monoculture lawns with a variety of plants. Those plants that are native to our area are lots of times what bugs have evolved to feed on. So they can only have certain plants, like the monarch is probably the best example of that, only can really complete its life cycle on a milkweed plant. They have to lay their eggs on milkweed. There's lots of other bugs that are less attractive and photogenic than that, that require one particular host species to complete some of their life cycle. And so his argument is we need more of these native plants so that there can be more native bugs. And the native bugs are good, not just from a diversity of our ecosystem perspective, but because that's food for birds. And it really changing our lawns from being all grass to being a wide variety of different plants improves our whole ecosystem. So that's definitely something that I think, although like lawn management sounds kind of like a boring topic, I think it's something that kids could get into. So once I identify my articles, it's just a matter of getting my Word template up and just pasting into it. I love using Google Docs, but I can't get Google Docs to give me columns. I would have to put it in as a table, and that's way too much work to fiddle around with. So this is one of the few things that I would use Microsoft Word for. Okay. Oh yeah, you definitely could take your Canva and then have that be something in Scratch, and you could do a programming thing with it. That would be kind of interesting. I like that application. So the hard part is finding the articles. I definitely will email you an article of the week template, and I'm going to write that down. So you'll have a copy of what I would do for one of mine and be able to adjust it to meet your needs. Absolutely. Another thing that I talk about with my students is looking at the date that things were published. That can make a lot of difference, and it's something that it's a good idea to get them used to at the middle school and high school level, that information is current and always evolving. If you've got an article that's more than 10 years old, it could still be good information, but it's something you might need to do a little outside research on to make sure that that's something that's still valid. And at the high school level, I would probably get more into how quickly certain fields are evolving. Like our knowledge of biology and those kind of things is moving so rapidly, particularly in particular areas like neuroscience and things like that, that I'm going to want most up-to-date articles that I can possibly find. So that teaching our students to be savvy readers and look at more than just what the article itself is saying, but also those other sort of pieces of context can be really important. All right, we have about a minute left. So I'm going to let you get on with your day. I will be sending a follow-up email very shortly, and that'll have those information in there as well. I'm going to assume that this recorded well, and so it's going to go up on our YouTube channel, so I might hold off until that's processed and up there so I can get you the link as well if it's something you want to come back to or share with others. So I will hang around for a bit, but I'm going to stop recording now.